I don't.
So, where did Muhammad abolish slavery?
Bob, there is nothing morally wrong about slavery.
There is nothing morally wrong with slavery. You actually don't think that owning a slave is a moral question.
I would love to.
Islam. Are you a Christian in disguise?
No, I'm not.
There you go. So a Muslim just said, I would love to own slaves. As I assume that he is, I'm assuming that he's a good man. Does that mean you have to oppose Sharia? Because Sharia permits the slave trade. It permits the slave trade. All right, Rob. Okay, nice talking to you. Look, I want to give you a Christmas present. As always.
My brother, you know they say throw the book at someone?
Yeah.
You can just open up any chapter here and read some from this so that you can answer some.
Here you go. This is my gift to you.
Okay, appreciate it very much.
Merry Christmas. I know we can't say Christmas back. So, anyway, let me finish my point. So my point to you is, guys, that Jesus said, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Which if you don't want to be someone else's slave, then you are obligated to oppose the slave trade. And if you're a Muslim that doesn't want to be a slave, then that means you have to oppose Sharia, because Sharia permits that someone else should be a slave. And this is the beauty of our Lord's teaching, because it allows you to pursue the good as the good becomes available in your circumstances. There was a time when it was impossible to get rid of slavery, but repeatedly through Christian history, in the 5th century, in the 10th century, in the 17th century, we Christians tried to abolish slavery. But in the 5th century, Islam didn't exist. In the 10th century, Muslims were busy taking slaves. And in the 17th century, Muslims were busy taking slaves. And Muhammad, he talked about genocide. Muhammad permitted genocide when he could have stopped it, and he chose not to, and he saw the Banu Quraysh murdered to a man and their women taken as concubines. Muhammad himself taking Safiya, a Jewish woman, as a concubine, married her and had sex with her within 3 days of her losing her husband, her father and her uncle. Do you honestly believe that Safiya wanted to have sex with Muhammad? Or is it more likely that Muhammad raped Safiya? Go on, now you can make a point.
Thank you, Bob. So,
Ali, if you jump into this conversation, I'll start interrupting you.
brother, mashallah, I can do
If you jump into this conversation, Ali, I'm going to start interrupting you.
Okay, Bob. So,
Go on, are you making a point?
we've had this long discussion about slavery. I've been happy to hear what you said and what my brother said, my Muslim brother in the faith. So what I want to put to you is, slavery has always existed. It exists and it always will exist. What I put to you is that there is nothing morally wrong about slavery, and I will prove this.
That's the problem with following Muhammad.
I will prove this from the Bible.
That's the problem in following Muhammad.
I will prove this, and from the Qur'an and wherever else you want to look. So we've established that slavery existed before the time of Jesus, since the time of Jesus. We've accepted that the Bible does not explicitly, although you've brought up some verses, but it doesn't explicitly condemn slavery. And we know that certain Christians were slave owners at the time of Paul. Now, I believe that we established that slavery means that you're the property of someone else. And since we're created by God, we believe that we're the slaves of God. You say that in Christianity, you believe that you're children of God. Now, the reason we don't use this analogy in Islam is because the son can be disobedient to the father. You have the story of the prodigal son, the believer who ran away and then came back to his father. Now in Islam we don't use this analogy because we recognize we were created by God, we recognize we're God's property. And the word slave has a negative connotation because of people like the Christians who quote unquote abolished slavery, but really nothing of the sort happened. You're talking about chattel slavery, people in chains being maybe whipped, made to do hard labor, that sort of thing. Now, what I put to you is that we're all slaves in some form or another. Why? I'll give you an example. If you work in this country or any country, you have to pay taxes. That means a portion of your labor is taken by the state. It's the property of the state. That means you're a slave. If you're a citizen, you're a slave. Every country has citizenship. That means every citizen in every country is in some respect a slave. Now you might say to me, oh well, we're not in chains being whipped or forced to do hard labor. Well, that's besides the point. And the brother brought up the point that, in cases of war, people are taken as prisoners of war. Now, Christian countries have had wars and took, during World War II, German prisoners of war. And so what's your point about...
Can I reply now?
Sorry, I've gone on a bit.
So let's be clear. You heard it again from his own lips.
You're a slave.
There's
I'm a
nothing...
slave.
Did I interrupt you?
All right, go on.
Learn some manners.
I've got plenty of manners.
Well, try practicing them. Try practicing them. No one's your dimmy mate.
I am practicing.
So try not interrupting, like I didn't interrupt you, and try practicing those manners you claim to have. So, as I was saying, you all heard it from his own lips, and this is the problem with following Muhammad. He literally said that it's not a moral question whether you own a slave. That's what Islam does to you if you follow it. You actually think that there's nothing moral about owning a slave. Now, we did see a real difference between Jesus' teaching and Muhammad's teaching. Jesus said, do unto others as you would have done unto you. So if you don't want to be a slave, that means you don't enslave other people. No, don't interrupt.
Right.
You don't enslave other people. Furthermore, if you don't enslave other people, it means you have to oppose ideologies that permit slavery, like Islam. And he said, well, yes, there were Christian slave owners. And we see an example in the book of Philemon, in the letter to Philemon, of what the example of Jesus did amongst the very first Christians. So let me read an example of it, because we know Muhammad bought slaves, sold slaves, permitted the trading in slaves, the raping of slaves. Now, let's look at what Philemon says. This is Paul writing. For this reason, though, I am bold enough in Christ to command you to do your duty. Yet I would rather appeal to you on the basis of love. Perhaps this is the reason he, a slave, was separated from you for a while, so that you might have him back forever. Listen to the next bit. No longer as a slave, but more than a slave, a beloved brother, especially to me, but how much more to you, both in the life and flesh and in the Lord. So the example of Jesus resulted in this kind of teaching. I could command you to do your duty, to accept him back, not as a slave, but as a brother. But by comparison, your slave trading prophet is permitted a slave trade to continue and has led you to the conclusion that slavery is not a moral question.
How is that more moral to free a slave? And
Oh, shut up now. Oh, he doesn't want to shut. Doesn't want to shut up now. The moment he started talking, he's got nothing to say.
He wants his comment.
Show me where your biblical God free.
So basically, the example you've used.
Oh, they shut up again. They've shut up again. They've got nothing to say now. Now that the Muslim's speaking, suddenly they're quiet. Hold on.
Okay, so the example you've used basically.
Oh, they've shut up again, look. They've shut up again. Oh, when he stops to speak, these guys have got nothing to say. But when I was talking, they couldn't shut up. Carry on.
So the example you've used, brother.
Oh, wait. Now he's stopping them from interrupting him. But when they were interrupting me, he had nothing to say to them.
Ladies,
Objections to stay.
the example you've used.
Wait, they shut up again.
Yes,
Why have you
we
been
have.
quiet?
We don't have a-
You
we don't
were
have a-
busy heckling me when I was talking, but when he's talking, you got nothing to say.
So the example you've used is Paul telling
Where is the manners, you
was he a
coward?
Christian slave?
Oh, they shut up again. Why have they shut up? When he's talking, they are quiet. But when I'm talking, they have something to say. But when they interrupted you, you wanted them to be quiet. But when they were interrupting me, you had nothing to say about it. And that's the problem with following Muhammad, is you think that Muslims are superior to Christians and can treat Christians however they want.
Just make a point that if he touches you, get tell him.
Prove us.
Ladies, you're going to be quiet when
Where
you
your biblical God is free.
Ladies, you're going to be quiet when you
Why are you being quiet? Why are you being quiet? Why are you being quiet? Carry on. I had to do it, you do it.
Paul
Rude, isn't it?
speaking to a slave owner
That was
and telling him to free his slave.
Not as a slave.
Right. So how is that? Why is that morally better than man remains?
Okay, let me answer that question because that is a very fair question. Okay, so the brothers asked a very fair question. And the question is, why is it morally better to not own a slave than to own a slave?
Free a slave.
I'll tell you why. Remember that and the question is, why is it morally better to not own a slave than to own a slave?
Free a slave.
I'll tell you why. Remember that Paul and Philemon were inspired by Jesus. That's
They never saw
important.
Jesus, Paul.
And Jesus,
They never
notice
saw
you've got
Jesus.
nothing to say to him
They
now.
never saw Jesus.
Notice
I
that.
don't know. We hear
Now,
this already.
Jesus said, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Why is it morally better not to own a slave? Because owning a slave as a piece of property denigrates another human being. It limits their freedoms. It limits their liberties, their ability to live their own life. The best way to treat another human being is with the optimum level of dignity that you can give them in your circumstances. Would you agree? Would you agree?
Wait, hold on, you're
The optimum, let me finish my answer then. The optimum level of dignity that a slave owner can give to a slave is their freedom. And if they choose not to do that, they denigrate themselves and they denigrate their slave. And what I find shocking, because you said, why don't I embrace Islam? Right at the beginning of this conversation, you said, are you thinking about becoming a Muslim? Your answers in this conversation are repugnant to any moral conscience. You said slavery should continue, that slavery isn't a moral question, that it's not immoral to own a slave. Your answers are the reason that I don't want to follow your
okay,
prophet.
Bob. So you said Jesus said, "Do unto others as you would be done by."
And would you agree that that would mean if you don't want to, do you want to be owned as a slave? Answer that. Do you personally want to be my property? No, Not my question. My question was, do you want to be the property of another human being?
I'm joking.
I'm a Muslim, so inshallah I will never be the property of another.
That is still not my question. My question is, do you want to be the property of another human being?
Why are you quiet?
Bob,
Answer my question.
Why are you quiet?
of course not. No.
No. So you see, he wants to legitimize actions to others that he doesn't want to have done to him. And that is why Jesus is a superior teacher than Muhammad.
That's also called hypocrisy, by the way.
It is hypocrisy, yes.
No, look, Bob.
Son of man.
When you say slave, you have to be a bit more specific here. What are we talking about?
I literally gave you the definition in the question.
Okay, so I told
Being
you.
the property of another human being.
So I told you that as citizens, we are slaves of the state because we have to pay taxes. So we are already slaves.
Obfuscating.
It's not obfuscating.
You're trying to compare being a citizen of a country to being the property of a human being. I don't know about anyone else in this audience, but I find that the most ridiculous comparison.
It's not ridiculous.
And the reason why he's making such a ridiculous comparison is because he recognizes that Jesus is a better moral teacher than Muhammad.
No, I don't.
So, where did Muhammad abolish slavery?
Bob, there is nothing morally wrong about slavery.
There is nothing morally wrong with slavery. That's what he just said in 21st century Britain.
There's always been slavery and there always will be.
And that is why I don't want to be a Muslim. You exemplify the reason why I reject
As a
Muhammad.
Muslim, you would not be a slave. But as a non-Muslim, you're already a slave to your own lusts
So
and your own
what
own intellectual pride.
he wanted to say was that as a Muslim you wouldn't be a slave, but as an unbeliever you could be.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Because the Islamic slave trade was based on that very thing. Muslims could take non-Muslims as slaves, but they couldn't take other Muslims as slaves. And that is why Islam is a repugnant ideology that every good human being should oppose, and why every Christian is duty bound to oppose.
So, you've still not told
Your
me,
values are repugnant.
You've still not told me why slavery is morally.
I'll tell you why. Because all human beings, would you agree, that apart from things like physical disabilities and socially economic status, that human beings are born with an equal dignity?
Yes, and slavery
Yes.
does not denigrate that
Yes.
in any way.
Now, tell me why you don't want to be a slave of another human being, which is what you said earlier. Why not?
Certainly.
Hey, brother,
It is
please.
suitable. that
Answer the
those
question.
who possess deen
Why?
and
You asked me why I wouldn't want to be a
believe
slave.
Why don't you want to be my property?
Look, I can't answer your questions, Bob. You're going over my head
Is
here.
he an
Okay,
Arab?
I'm going over his head. And the reason, ladies and gentlemen, why I'm going over his head is because Islam has not equipped him with the moral vocabulary to enter into the discussion. Any normal human being would recognize that slavery denigrates one human being against another. Christianity teaches that all human beings are born equal, and we should try as best as we can to maintain that equality as much as we can, given the circumstances. But Islam does exactly the opposite. And that is why,
No, it
bro,
doesn't, Bob. Stop
you need to
lying.
come back to
Stop lying,
Christianity.
Bob.
Is he an
run.
Arab?
He's run. He's run away. He's run away. He's run away. Okay, bro, I'm going to go over there. Anyone who wants to listen to my wrap up, I'm moving that way.
Here we go.
Okay, so the brother that left the conversation started that conversation by asking me, have you got any thoughts about becoming a Muslim? With the assumption that Islam was naturally superior. And the reality is that we've seen in that conversation that the teaching, yes, afterwards I will, that Jesus' teaching is morally superior to Muhammad. What they don't recognize is the microphone's here. So Jesus' teaching leads directly to the ending of slavery. But Muhammad's example, as we heard from the Muslims themselves, leads to the continuation of slavery. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, that following Christ is better than following Muhammad. Right, you wanted to ask a question.
Born and raised in Oxford, graduated from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, having completed a BA in African history.
The question was, where does Jesus free a slave? The answer to that question is because Jesus never owned a slave, Jesus never could free a slave. But, brother, let me finish. The fact that he lived in a time where he could have owned a slave but never did means that he is our example and he is better than Muhammad, who at a time when he could own a slave, did own slaves and did trade in slaves. Do you want to ask a question? No, let her ask a question. Don't be rude. I'll come back to you. Go on. Don't be rude, Sam. Sam, the lady wants to ask a question. It's all right. They don't think women can speak. Go on.
Actually, none of them abolished slavery, but they just kind of told humanity to free slaves whenever they have made this sin.
Okay, let me because
just because Jesus and Muhammad did not abolish slavery doesn't mean that it was fine. I mean, it was a practice that was so widespread at that time.
Yep.
We're talking about 15 centuries ago, 20 centuries ago. So whenever somebody would make a major sin, these people would tell them, just free a slave. And little by little, the slavery was abolished.
Okay, so let me come back to you, because unfortunately, your goodwill has meant that you haven't analysed the facts properly. Jesus Christ stated, if do unto others as you would have done unto you. So if I don't want to be a slave, then I don't own other people as slaves, and I oppose. I'll come back to you, Sammy. Sammy, I will come back to you. Sammy, you have my word that I'll come back to you. So I'll finish replying to you, because don't be rude to the lady. So my point to you is, Christ said, don't do unto others that you would have done unto you. So if I don't want to be, let me finish my point. That if I don't want to own a slave, I don't own a, if I don't want to be a slave, I don't own a slave, and I oppose ideologies that permit a slave. I've just debated two Muslims who in this park, to my face and on camera, have said that slavery isn't moral, it's not a moral question, and that Muhammad established slavery forever. That's what two Muslims just told me in this park, and we have it on camera. You can see it on Soco films, they say it on camera.
Bob, there is nothing morally wrong about slavery.
There is nothing morally wrong with slavery. Now, my point to you is, yes, and he also said that those who take slaves will burn in hell. And he also said to slaves, he also said that those, don't be rude to the lady, that those who if those slaves who can gain their freedom, they should seek to get it. He also said to a slave, who was going back to his master, he was also said to a slave who went back to his master, he said to the master, don't take him back as a slave, take him back as a brother. But by comparison, Muhammad sold slaves, he permitted slaves. It's in the hadiths, madam, which is in Islamic literature. You see, the Muslims can object, but we can show them. Right, now, Sammy, you wanted to ask. The thing is,
the hadith.
Go on, sister.
Hadith.
You want me to show you the hadith?
Yeah. Okay. And still you can't prove to me Jesus, he never freed a single slave when the Prophet Muhammad he freed slaves.
Jesus never owned a slave. He was
But
better
in
than
his
Muhammad.
But in his time they were slaves.
He would never owned a slave,
But
bro.
they were slaves.
Can you set a
They were
slave free
slaves.
if you own
They
a
were
slave?
slave. He can buy them and free them. Sorry.
Sammy,
He
let
can
me ask you
buy-
this question.
He can buy slave and free them, yes or no?
Sammy, let's...
He can answer my question. He can buy them and free them.
That was a possibility, yes. That was a
Yeah,
possibility.
then why he didn't
Right,
do?
no, hold on. We're
Why
going to
he
do
didn't
question
do?
for question, Sammy.
No, why he didn't
Sammy,
do?
Sammy.
Why he didn't
Sammy,
do? Why
Sammy.
he didn't do?
You don't,
That
you
game-
don't get to do the
Look,
silliness.
No.
You do this childishness
No,
every
I'm not
week.
childish. No,
Be a man.
You are weakness
Grow up.
and you instrument.
Let's
Finish
do
my
a question for a
Why he didn't
question.
do?
Let's do a
Why
question
he
for a
didn't do?
question.
Why he didn't
Sammy,
do?
Sammy, I'm going
Why
to
he
stop
didn't
if you
do?
can't do
Why
a
he didn't
conversation.
do?
Sammy,
Answer my
if
question.
you can't do a
Finish my question.
conversation,
Finish my question.
Sammy,
No, I'm
if you
proving
can't
to
do a
you,
conversation,
your God,
no,
he
you're just
not
asking,
talk about,
you're just asking
about slavery.
machine
He
gun
left it
questions.
like this.
You're
Okay,
just
why he
asking
didn't
machine
do
gun
it?
questions.
Why he
Let
didn't
me
do
show
it?
you.
Why he didn't do it?
Let me show you.
Why he didn't do it?
Let me show you.
Why he didn't do it?
Let me show you.
Why
Let me
your
show
biblical
you.
God?
Let me
when
show you.
They were slaves.
Let
why
me
he
show
didn't free
you.
a single slave? He can buy them and free them. He has that possibility.
Okay,
And he is a
Miss,
God.
I want to ask you. You asked me where is the evidence that Muhammad traded in slaves. Okay, so you can look up this reference yourself.
Can I take a picture?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
You can go away and do your research. You'll find it in Sahih al-Bukhari. Just put Google Sahih al-Bukhari slavery.
He didn't
Yeah.
buy slaves.
Okay. Yeah, here we go.
Tell him.
Here's
But he
here.
appointed black
No.
people
Yeah.
as
Excuse me,
commanders
madam.
of armies.
You asked
Show me
me,
where he
madam.
said
Does
he
that
bought
justify
them.
trading in slaves then?
No.
Thank
In the
you.
time,
So Muhammad's
they
not
were
justified.
captive.
Look at what this says.
But he
Madam,
didn't pay the Prophet
are you talking to him or talking to me?
But when he
You asked me a
saw-
question, I'm going to answer your question. Yeah, Arabic is down there. Look at what it says here, miss. Miss, I'm going to walk away if you're not listening.
Okay, I'm listening
So here's
to
what
you.
it says. There came a slave and pledged an allegiance to Allah's apostle on migration. He, the Holy Prophet, did not know that he was a slave. Then, whereupon there came to his master and demanded him back. Whereupon Allah's apostle said, "Sell him to me." And he bought him for 2 black slaves.
And then he freed them.
No, you didn't listen.
He did.
He sold 2 black slaves.
He did.
2 black slaves.
He had asked him whether he was
It doesn't say that those black slaves were freed. There's the Arabic. So we're not lying. We're not lying. We're not lying. We're not lying. You can, madam, you can make excuses as much as you want. But you've just said it's not justifiable to own slaves. Muhammad owned slaves, so Muhammad is not. He sold 2 black slaves. He sold 2 black slaves. He sold 2. I showed you in your own hadith. Anyway, good night. It was lovely talking to you.
Stop lying.
Have a good day.
But
God
his
bless.
biblical God, he never
Grow up morally. You're a moral child. Yes, you're a moral child. You actually don't think that owning a slave is a moral question.
I would love to.
Islam. Bro, did we just get that on camera? He just say it again to the camera.
Listen,
Say it again. I would love to own slaves. Say it again.
I wouldn't want to own you though.
No, answer the
I wouldn't
question.
want to
He
own
just
you.
He just said to me, I would love to own slaves. That's the problem with following Muhammad.
I'm a slave.
That's the problem. That is the problem with following Muhammad. You've just seen it on camera. Now, can I just check? Are you a member of the BNP?
No, I'm a Muslim. Boy.
Okay. Have I paid you to say that to the camera?
No,
Are you a Christian in disguise?
no, I'm not.
There you go. So a Muslim just said, I would love to own slaves. That is what he just said in 2021.
You are all slaves because you pay
Now,
taxes.
bro,
that means a portion of
if you
your
don't mind,
labour belongs to the
bro,
state.
if
you
you-
are by
No,
definition
that's
all slaves.
that's just obfuscating. That's not a slave.
Yes, you are.
This is how desperate he is to try and free Muhammad.
And as Muslims, we are slaves of Allah.
Right.
Now, a Muslim
Guys,
is
no offense.
going to be the
No
slave
offense. offense,
of a non-Muslim.
but I'd like to do a talk now. I'd like to do a talk now. Is that all right?
Can you talk about the curse of Ham?
No, not this week. No, I would like to do a talk.
Why is Ham slave?
I would like to do a talk.
In your book.
I would like to do a talk.
We don't have the choice.
Okay.
If the judge is imposed, you don't have a choice.
Right. So,
Bob, if you were my slave,
I would like
I'd
to do a
free
talk.
you.
I would.
I couldn't bear you being my
If I want to
slave.
live in my
Yeah,
land with my
the sad thing is, what a nice guy. He wants to own slaves, but he'd free me. What a nice bloke. That's the problem with following Muhammad, is it leads you to these conclusions. If you ever wanted proof why you should oppose Islam, he's the proof. Okay. I don't want to follow a slave trading religion. No. Yes.
Come on, they do
Yes.
everything for you, Bob.
Have you heard him? Have you heard him? Okay. So, guys, right. I would like to talk.
Very graphic, very graphic. Right?
I'd like to talk about Christianity, if I may. Yeah. I'd like to talk about Christianity, if I may. Yeah. Okay. So, no, I want to talk about. Okay. Okay. Shall we move away from the triggered Muslim? Let's move away from the triggered Muslim. I'm going to do a talk on Christianity. If you'd like to hear about that talk on Christianity, let's go over here.